She fell in love with the Soviet pilot next to her at first sight, so throughout the entire event, her gaze would often fall on the pilot Grivtsov, and her intense stare was finally noticed by the perceptive Grivtsov. That was how Katya and Grivtsov met, and they soon became close friends who could talk about everything. Until that night, Katya, who was obsessed with all kinds of code-breaking, taught Grivtsov a string of Morse code hand by hand. Although Grivtsov had learned code-breaking during his military academy training, he had long since forgotten it completely. At that moment, he thought Katya was just showing off her hobby, not knowing that she was actually confessing her love to him through Morse code. Early the next morning, as a pilot, Grivtsov ended his leave and returned to the front line, and the first thing he did when he got back to the front was to go to the codebreakers and check the codebooks. After some searching, he finally understood the deep love in the code that Katya had tapped out to him. Overjoyed, he was so excited that he couldn't sleep all night. One night half a month later, Grivtsov received a secret mission to transport a codebreaker. They were to airdrop a codebreaker and a telegraph machine into German-occupied territory. The guerrillas would light a fire at the designated location to guide them to the specific drop zone. But Grivtsov never expected that the codebreaker he was tasked with transporting was none other than Katya, who had confessed her love to him in code. Katya also never expected that as soon as she arrived at the front, she would meet her beloved pilot Grivtsov. This undoubtedly made her more convinced that her love with Grivtsov was destined by fate. Having understood each other's feelings, the two hugged tightly, but intense sorrow surged up in their hearts in an instant, because they knew that this meeting meant they would soon part again, and this separation might be for a very long time, or even forever. But no matter how reluctant they were, as soldiers, they could only go forward without hesitation for their motherland. Soon they arrived near the target drop zone, and the guerrillas had already lit a bonfire to provide them with the specific drop location. But at that moment, the sky suddenly filled with thunder and lightning. To avoid the lightning, they had to descend to a lower altitude and change their original flight path. But as a result, they were detected by German radar. Soon, they were locked onto by German anti-aircraft units. Sensing danger, they immediately tried to evade. But the next second, anti-aircraft shells came rushing towards them one after another. The dense German anti-aircraft fire net left them with nowhere to hide in an instant. The fighter jet was soon hit by multiple shells, and seeing that the jet was gradually losing control, they had to choose to bail out. But Katya, who was participating in actual combat for the first time, suddenly lost the courage to jump, and in the end, she and Grivtsov, who was piloting the plane, rushed towards the ground together. Fortunately, however, they both survived safely. The two immediately fled the pursuit area with the telegraph machine. Knowing that the quick-reacting German squad would arrive soon, they had to get as far away from this area as possible before the German squad arrived. Sure enough, as soon as they escaped into the woods, a squad of German soldiers rushed towards the crashed fighter jet. The Germans searched the fighter jet but found nothing, so they immediately launched a thorough search of the nearby woods. Although they came up empty-handed, the German officer had no intention of giving up. He immediately led his troops to launch a rigorous search of the nearby woods. At this time, the pilot was leading the codebreaker Katya in a desperate run, with the sound of German military dogs getting closer and closer behind them. In a critical moment, they accidentally found a small river. The experienced pilot immediately took the codebreaker Katya and jumped into the river to escape the pursuit of the German military dogs. Soon, the Germans, led by the military dogs, quickly arrived at the spot where the two had just entered the water. With no direction to follow, the Germans immediately opened fire fiercely on the river. Katya and the pilot hid together in the water not far away, motionless, not daring to make a sound. They thought the Germans would leave soon, but instead, the Germans stayed on the riverbank, showing no sign of leaving. After an unknown amount of time, the German officer finally led his team away from the riverbank. Only then did Katya and the others narrowly escape the German pursuit for the time being. And after going through this life-and-death ordeal, the relationship between Katya and the pilot Grivtsov beside her heated up rapidly. The flame of love was instantly ignited in their hearts, burning more and more vigorously. After a moment of tenderness, pilot Grivtsov immediately packed up his things, ready to take Katya and continue their escape. But Katya thought that escaping without a purpose would hardly succeed, so she turned on the telegraph machine and tried to contact the Soviet headquarters to ask for the location of the nearby guerrilla camp. She wanted to take Grivtsov to the guerrilla camp to hide for a while, and then find a way to help Grivtsov return to the Soviet army. But as soon as they turned on the telegraph machine, the signal it emitted was intercepted by the Germans. Although their whereabouts were exposed, they finally learned the exact location of the guerrilla camp. Then the two began to plan the best route to the guerrilla camp, but suddenly, it started raining heavily continuously after being soaked in the river water for a long time and now being exposed to the continuous heavy rain. The frail Katya began to have a high fever and felt weak in her limbs. Grivtsov had planned to take Katya to the guerrilla camp without alerting anyone, but now, for Katya's health, he had to take the risk of taking Katya to knock on a villager's door. Although she knew that sheltering Soviet soldiers would mean certain death if discovered by the Germans, the kind-hearted woman couldn't bear to see her compatriots suffering in the rain. After hesitating for a moment, she finally decided to let the two stay at her home for the night. The woman used hot wine to rub Katya's back continuously, cooked her some hot soup to dispel the cold, and then let her hide in a warm quilt to rest and recover. And the dedicated Katya, even though she was ill, insisted on keeping the telegraph machine by her side. She slowly fell asleep under the comfort of her boyfriend Grivtsov. But the next morning, just before dawn, a squad of puppet soldiers came to the village to search under the orders of the Germans. The panicked woman immediately ran back to the wooden house to inform Katya and the others to escape quickly. Learning that the puppet soldiers were about to arrive, they wasted no time in fleeing the wooden house and rushing towards the woods. They ran for an unknown amount of time, then leaned against a big tree, out of breath, grateful to have escaped danger again. Then they prepared to put on their clothes and continue their escape. But at the moment they put on their military uniforms, Katya suddenly realized that they had left the telegraph machine at the woman's house. She immediately turned around and ran back towards the woman's house, suddenly realizing that she had made a fatal mistake. So she turned around and ran as fast as she could. When she managed to run back to the village, she only saw the kind woman who had taken her in the previous night running around in panic. When she wanted to rush over to try to rescue her, she was grabbed by her boyfriend who had chased after her. Then, the next second, the kind woman who had taken them in the previous night was shot dead by the puppet soldiers. At this moment, Katya's heart was filled with remorse and self-blame, because she had accidentally left the telegraph machine at the woman's house when she had just left, which had led to the tragedy in front of her. But no matter how much she blamed herself and grieved, the tragedy could not be undone. After killing the woman, the puppet soldiers carried away all the valuable things from her house, and finally set fire to the woman's wooden house, burning it to the ground. The grief-stricken and self-reproaching Katya could only hide in the grass not far away with her boyfriend, silently watching everything in front of her. The elated puppet squad leader couldn't wait to order his son to take the telegraph machine back to the camp to claim a reward from the Germans. Katya and her boyfriend Grivtsov followed closely all the way, trying to find an opportunity to retrieve the telegraph machine. Before long, they finally found a perfect opportunity. Boyfriend Grivtsov seized the chance to jump down quickly from a high place, directly tackling the puppet squad leader's son off the carriage. But unexpectedly, the other man was strong and sturdy, and as a result, Grivtsov, who had launched the surprise attack, was directly pinned down, unable to move. Seeing that the man had pulled out a dagger, boyfriend Grivtsov's life was in imminent danger. Katya, experiencing such a scene for the first time, mustered up the courage, picked up a wooden stick, rushed over, and hit the man hard. Then, Katya quickly picked up the telegraph machine and got up to continue running, but she was suddenly called by her boyfriend Grivtsov. Because Grivtsov had a better escape plan, Grivtsov planned to pretend to be a puppet soldier and swagger straight through the German sentry post. Katya, sitting on the carriage, would pretend to be a captured Soviet prisoner. In this way, the two drove the carriage quickly towards the German sentry post on the wooden bridge. Soon, they were stopped by two puppet soldiers guarding the wooden bridge sentry post. Boyfriend Grivtsov introduced himself and his prisoner to the guards. To make them believe him, he even pushed Katya over casually. But unexpectedly, the other party became lustful, saying that to verify whether Katya was really a Soviet prisoner, he would take Katya into the room to interrogate her alone. Grivtsov quickly told the puppet soldiers that he had an important mission and must take Katya back to the German headquarters. But the puppet soldiers ignored him and insisted on taking Katya into the room to interrogate her alone. As he spoke, he ordered his men to try to drag Katya off the carriage by force. Helpless, Grivtsov had no choice but to act decisively, directly pushing the puppet soldiers off the wooden bridge, and then drove the carriage quickly through the sentry post and fled in panic. But the puppet soldiers chased after them on horseback, refusing to let them go. To shake off the pursuing puppet soldiers, Grivtsov had to let the inexperienced Katya drive the carriage, while he himself held a gun and kept shooting at the puppet soldiers. But at that moment, they suddenly encountered another squad of puppet soldiers. Katya, who had never driven a carriage before, panicked and tried to turn around, but the next second the carriage tipped over to the ground. A fierce exchange of fire immediately broke out between the two sides. Although boyfriend Grivtsov fought desperately, he was outnumbered, helpless. They had to get up and flee towards the woods, but no matter how hard they ran, the puppet soldiers behind them kept chasing closely. In the critical moment, Grivtsov handed the telegraph machine to Katya, telling her to take it and flee along the river alone, while he was determined to stay behind to block the puppet soldiers, buying Katya a glimmer of hope to survive. With that, he pushed Katya away and quickly got up to charge at the puppet soldiers. Helpless, Katya could only cast one last reluctant glance at her boyfriend, then got up and fled alone. Before long, she suddenly heard a violent explosion behind her. At this moment, Katya's heart shattered completely, but powerless as she was, she had to continue running with a heart full of grief. To prevent being tracked by German military dogs, she jumped into the small river at intervals, just as her boyfriend Grivtsov had told her. She ran like this all the way until night fell. A man suddenly noticed a soaking wet girl climbing out of the river behind him. They immediately stood up cautiously and looked around, but the next second, the girl took off her pants and started wringing the water out of her clothes. The two men quickly got up, ready to approach the girl slowly, but they were unexpectedly spotted by her. The girl immediately screamed and hid behind a big tree, then quickly pulled out a pistol, trembling as she warned them not to come near. Seeing this, the two men quickly stopped in their tracks. Standing motionless where they were, they hurriedly explained that they were not bad people. But how could the panic-stricken Katya easily believe them? Then Katya raised her gun and fired a warning shot into the sky. After some explanation, Katya finally believed that the two men in front of her were the guerrillas she had been desperately looking for. Seeing that Katya, who had been fleeing for days, was exhausted, the guerrillas immediately carried her on their backs warmly and ran towards their camp. It turned out that since Katya's failed airdrop and plane crash, the guerrillas had also been searching everywhere for her. Now that they saw she was safe, everyone was overjoyed, because she was the expert the Soviets had airdropped to the guerrillas, and she had also brought them a telegraph machine that could contact the Soviet headquarters. In this way, Katya finally joined the guerrillas after going through countless hardships. She had thought her boyfriend had died together with the puppet soldiers while covering her escape. But unexpectedly, one afternoon a few days later, she saw her boyfriend Grivtsov in a leaflet printed by the Germans, which promoted the Germans' kind treatment of prisoners. The moment she saw her boyfriend, Katya's gloomy world was instantly filled with life. She couldn't help but kiss the captain, grateful that he had brought this leaflet to her. But the next second, she hid on the bed and cried helplessly, for her boyfriend was trapped in a cage, and she could do nothing about it. The guerrilla member who had carried her all the way into the camp saw how sad Katya was, so he secretly took her out of the camp and went to the village near the German prisoner of war camp. It turned out that many women in the village were forced to wash clothes for the Germans in the prisoner of war camp every day. Through the introduction of this kind-hearted member, Katya got a chance to enter the prisoner of war camp to deliver clothes. As she helped the women unload the clothes from the carriage, she looked around, searching for her boyfriend Grivtsov, but after searching for a long time, she found nothing. Soon the clothes were handed over, and helpless, she had to leave slowly with the carriage. She seized the last chance to search frantically among the crowd, but still failed to see her long-missed boyfriend. Early the next morning, Katya came to help the women wash clothes. She wanted to enter the prisoner of war camp again to find her beloved boyfriend, but unexpectedly, she found 2 keys in one of the clothes. Without thinking much, she casually threw the keys into the nearby grass. Not long after, a German soldier quickly appeared in front of them. The German, looking flustered, ordered them to stop washing immediately, then began rummaging through the piles of clothes, seemingly searching for something very important. But after searching for a long time and finding nothing, he stood in the water, dazed and helpless, muttering to himself. Sharp Katya knew the German was probably looking for the keys she had just thrown into the grass, but she hated the Germans, so she didn't tell him where the keys were. The German then turned to them and said, "Have you seen my keys? They're the keys to the basement archive. If the officer finds out I've lost them, he'll never let me off." Since the women couldn't understand German, they all stared at the German in confusion. Only Katya understood the German's predicament, for she had thrown the keys into the grass with her own hands, and she was fluent in German, so she could understand his words. Watching the German's anxious and flustered expression, Katya hesitated for a moment, then finally got up quickly, picked up the keys, and returned them to him. The German, overjoyed at getting the keys, thanked Katya repeatedly and even took out money to reward her. but Katya refused all of it. Noticing that Katya was fluent in German, he offered to help her get a clerical job at the German headquarters, which would be much easier than washing clothes here. To find out where her boyfriend Grivtsov was, Katya agreed without hesitation. After returning to the camp, she reported the matter to the captain. With the captain's approval, Katya happily went to report for duty at the German headquarters. Thus began Katya's dangerous and nerve-wracking undercover career. Doing undercover work for the first time, she appeared calm on the surface, but her heart was extremely nervous and flustered. She sat silently at her desk, always being cautious with her words and actions, fearing to show the slightest sign of suspicion. Since it was her first time as an undercover agent, she had no idea how to gather information, so she took advantage of the absence of others to look around the office, searching for clues everywhere. Then, she often secretly hid outside the German officers' office doors, looking for opportunities to eavesdrop. It wasn't until one afternoon a few days later that she accidentally heard the Germans discussing a special train. Sharp as she was, she inferred from their tone that this train must be extremely important, but after listening for a long time, she couldn't figure out what made it so important. Determined to uncover the secret hidden by this mysterious train, she pulled out her pistol and confronted a German who had just attended the meeting. She wanted to get specific information about the train from this German, but to her surprise, the German didn't panic at all when he saw the gun. He looked at Katya calmly and said, "If you shoot here, you'll kill not just me, but yourself too, because there's no way you'll escape from here alive." After hearing the German's words, Katya's hand holding the gun couldn't help but tremble a little, but after hesitating for a moment, she finally put the gun on the desk. Then, with a fearless expression, she said to the German, "I'm not afraid of death." As soon as she said this, the German tensed up, but he still decided to take a risk. He told Katya directly, "Actually, I'm not afraid of death either. You can shoot." Just then, Katya suddenly heard someone approaching outside the door, so she hurriedly tucked the gun into her arms. Then the German was called out of the office. The German immediately stood up joyfully and walked slowly out of the room. At this point, Katya's heart was already in a turmoil. She had no idea what to do next. She wanted to open the door and leave, but was worried about being blocked by the Germans. She wanted to jump out the window to escape, but realized this was the 5th floor. Helpless, she paced back and forth in the office, anxious and restless. Just as she thought she was doomed, the German who had just left suddenly walked in again. What surprised Katya even more was that the German told her all the details about the special train. It turned out that this mysterious train was carrying a powerful flying missile newly developed by the Germans, and it would pass through their area at 5 p.m. the next day on its way to the front. Confused, Katya questioned why the German had taken the initiative to tell her the information. The German fell silent for a few seconds, then told her the reason. It turned out that before the war, this German had been a university professor. He knew how powerful this flying missile was, and once it was launched, it would mean countless innocent civilians would be killed indiscriminately. Being kind at heart, he didn't want to see such a tragic scene of civilians being slaughtered. With that, the German slowly walked out of the office. Katya wasted no time in leaving the German headquarters, then rushed to the contact person to report the information she had obtained to the Soviet headquarters. At this point, the top Soviet officials already knew that the Germans had developed a powerful flying missile, but they didn't know the exact time it would be put into combat. The information provided by Katya couldn't have come at a better time for the top Soviet officials. That night, a team of Soviet special forces, guided by local guerrillas, secretly parachuted near the vital passage of the German train transporting the flying missile. The next afternoon, they and the guerrillas lay in ambush near the railway early, waiting for this mysterious German train. Sure enough, at 5:03, a German military train appeared in everyone's sight. Then a fierce exchange of fire broke out between the two sides. Since the Germans had deployed a large number of soldiers to guard the train, the Soviet special forces and guerrillas suffered heavy casualties, paying a heavy price. Fortunately, though, they successfully detonated the flying missile on the train before the German reinforcements arrived. Katya never thought that what started as a mission to find her boyfriend in the German headquarters would end up with her making a great contribution, but her boyfriend was still nowhere to be found. After that, she continued working with the guerrillas, filled with longing for her boyfriend, until one day, she suddenly realized she was pregnant with his child. So she applied to return to the rear of the Soviet army. Just as she was about to leave the army to go home and rest quietly during her pregnancy, she suddenly received news that her boyfriend, after being captured by the Germans, had defected to them and betrayed his motherland, and that he had been executed by the Soviet army a week earlier. At this moment, Katya's heart turned completely cold, and tears poured out uncontrollably. After that, she gave birth to the child alone. This child carried all her longing for her boyfriend and was the motivation that kept her going. Until this day, her boyfriend, who was supposed to have been executed, suddenly appeared in front of her again. She walked slowly towards him in disbelief, not knowing what had happened, but at this moment, she didn't care what had happened, because what mattered to her was that her boyfriend was back, her love was back, her happiness was back. For Katya, that was enough. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.